All right, and we're back. Welcome back to the channel. We're once again working on the Cruze. We literally just did the cooler, the oil cooler, and redid the oil pan, gasket, and all that. Drove it around for like 30 minutes. Checked coolant, everything was good, no leaks. Had pressure washed everything underneath, and then got brought back to me 2 days later. It's got a coolant leaking on the panel underneath on this side. So did a pressure test, and it appears to be coming from the water pump. So I can't really get a good view of it though. So I was looking at it with the mirror. It looks like it's dripping from the weep hole underneath the water pump onto the AC compressor and down. So fortunately unrelated to what we did, but these things happen coincidentally. We fixed, we changed a bunch of coolant stuff, and now it's got a coolant leak, So it happens, but obviously it's from a different area. It's not something we touched. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the air box off, pull the belt off, and we actually have to lift the motor to get to the water pump bolts, or the water pump pulley bolts. So I'll show how to do that. We'll remove the pulley, do another pressure test just to verify that's where the leak's coming from, since we'll be able to see it better. And from there, I guess, get a water pump on order and go ahead and replace it. May do a belt and tensioner while we have all that stuff off too. So let's get started. In my other video, I show how to pull this stuff off too, so there will be some duplicates, I guess. So we'll start with pulling this this air box off. So undoing our hose clamp here. I think there's like 6 screws, Phillips heads, undoing this hose to the air pump, and pulling this whole assembly out to give us more space to get to the belt and the pulley and all that. So we'll go ahead and start with this. All right, just pop it off those 2 little tabs. That's out of the way. See, here's our water pump. Your pulley bolts are right here. And unfortunately, you got this giant pinch weld here. Sorry, light sucks. So you can't get a socket or anything on to those bolts. Very, not the greatest design, so to speak. So we got our belt routed. So actually we want to, before we pull the belt off, because it kind of holds the pulley, we want to go ahead and loosen up the engine mount first. And we're going to jack the motor up from the bottom. So I'll put a 2x4 underneath the jack on the oil pan and be very careful and come up with it. So probably just remove these same bolts that I removed last time when I did the cooler. Only we're not going to have to pick the engine up from the top like we had to with that, since we were removing the oil pan. So just pull this nut, these 2 bolts off, lift it up just high enough to where we can access these Torx bits here. We'll just break those loose, then we'll pull the belt and then loosen and pull the pulley, and then I can pressure test and get a better view to make sure that's exactly what's leaking. So you can remove this as well if you wanted to. I prefer just pulling these. These have like normal torque specs. I think once you get into these mounts over here, you have to do like a torque plus a degree, like degrees. Which I didn't want to really mess with that. I think I can get to everything just by having those out. So the less you have to take apart, I feel like the better. So we'll just do those. I'll go grab a jack and some wood, and we'll lift it up just a little bit. All right, so we got a board underneath the pan, center. Just went up easy. and it's starting to you see it coming up. So we're going to go ahead and see if I should be able to spin this and hopefully access those bolts. So let's give it a try. Alright, got one of them broke. I mean, if you want to pull this, it could probably make it easier to get in here. I'm trying to not pull as little as possible. Alright, so the two top ones I could get to are broke loose. I'm going to spin the motor to move that bottom one up to the top, break that loose, and then we can go ahead and pull the belt. So there's your crankshaft. The bolt is actually a E-torque, so it's an E18. So I just got an E18. Get it on there first. Alright, so just got an E18 on there with the long handle, and then you just spin the crank. And it should spin easily. I already spun it up to get what I needed. Easily be able to come in here and break this loose. Make sure we're going the right way first. There it goes. All right. With the pulley bolts loose, I'm going to go ahead and drop the motor back down. Actually, I won't do that yet. It'll probably be easier to get to that. So there's some other videos out there you can look at, like a tensioner picture. There's a 12-point head down there right behind the pulley there, right in front of the tensioner, and that's what you use to push the tensioner back to get the belt off. There's been some videos of people disassembling this whole thing so you can really see it. I'm not taking all this apart, but it's back there. You can feel for it. You need a 12-point 19mm or 3/4 socket. So we have our 12-point 3/4. Make sure it's set on loosen. Just shove it down in here. You can't see it, you just got to kind of feel for it, and it'll pop on. There it is. So it's popped on right there. And you can pull, and you can see the belt loosen, the tension come off the belt. So come down, I'll pull right there. Sorry, I'm holding this and the camera. I'm pulling it off the alternator. Trying to. So, sorry. Really need a filmer. So I'm going to pull this back, and then I can pull it off the alternator, and that pulls the belt. So let that go. Oops. And there it is. It pops our belt off. Kind of hard to see, but you know. So now we'll pull these bolts off this pulley since we broke them loose, and then we'll pressure test the system and make sure that's where our leak's coming from. Let's see if we can get this in there. Might be easier. there's blue Loctite on those. So I have to make sure we put blue Loctite when we go back together. Alright, our pulley's off. You see our water pump here, looking pretty crusty. So definitely have a feeling that's for sure what's leaking. But obviously we want to check. So we got our coolant pressure tester. We got to see what fitting we need. So it's not a radiator style cap. So looks like it's going to be that guy. You should be able to rent these from AutoZone too if you don't have them, or any, I say AutoZone, any auto parts store should be able to rent them. So we'll follow the instructions on whatever type of setup you got. So it's snug. So we're going to pump about 15 psi in there. Now if you have a leak, obviously the pressure will bleed off, and it should, and then you can, so we got 15 psi. Now we can go around and look and see where we have a leak coming from, since we know there's a leak. Good. Damn it. This lighting is not the greatest. See the drip? I think you can see the drip on the camera. So that drip is coming from somewhere. Appears to be the water pump. Yeah, that's not going to come out. Unfortunately, I can't film the mirror. It's too bright. See, it appears to be coming out of the bottom of the water pump. Alright, so yeah, as you can see, it's coming from the bottom of the water pump. Not sure if it's just the seal behind it or if it's the entire pump, but we're going to go ahead and replace the whole pump. It's looking pretty rough. AC Delco has one. I can Amazon it, and it's like 56 bucks. So we'll go ahead and get that going. We'll talk with my friend's mom and see if they're interested in wanting to replace that idler as well. Might as well do a belt and pulley. The car's got 90,000 miles on it, so do the not the idler, the tensioner and the pulley. So as you can see, if we come back over here, we're slightly below 15 now, so it's slowly dropping pressure, which would indicate we got a leak. Alright, so we'll pick this back up when I get some parts and replace the water pump. Alright, picking up like a week later. I got the parts we needed, so new belt, AC Delco belt, AC Delco water pump. Comes with new O-ring, and the pump itself. So yeah, looks good. Like no shaft play in this whatsoever, which I was messing with the other one. There's like a little bit of shaft play in it, so it was definitely on its way out. So this I'm going to add earlier in the video. This is the 12 point that you couldn't really see to undo the tension on the tensioner. So you get a 12.3 or 19, and that's how you detension. So where I left off, go ahead and undo the bolts on the water pump. I believe there are 5 or 6, I think. And obviously we'll lose a little bit of coolant there, clean up the surface, put our new O-ring and our new pump on, torque it up. May actually pull the water pump and replace the tensioner first. Tensioner may be easier to get to with the water pump out of the way. So anywho, we'll get to it. Alright, here's our old and new water pump. It's interesting, the old one's a plastic wheel, the new AC Delco's aluminum. And then you obviously have a gasket here. Looks very flat. I think this is where some of our leaking was coming from. The new one comes with an O-ring style gasket. So it's interesting. Hopefully this will work better, but we'll see. This one's definitely pretty corroded and worn out. As I said, now you can see the tensioner. That's your 12 point down there, and then the tensioner bolts. I'm going to go ahead and replace that while the water pump's out of the way. So we'll go ahead and put that in, and then get some Scotch-Brite and clean up the mating surface where the water pump was. Make sure it's all cleaned up and install our new O-ring water pump and torque it up. Okay, so our tensioner bolt's a E14. It's another E-Torx bit. So we'll go ahead and break that loose. If I can get it on there. Alright, there's our old tensioner. You can hear the bearings in it making a little bit of noise. A little rusty around there, so good thing we went ahead and replaced this while we're in here. Not sure how well the camera's picking this up, but you could see down in there where I pulled the tensioner from, there's a little like square cutout. So that's obviously where that square is going to sit. So when you put it in, it should sit in just like this. and then you have the pin here that's holding it open right now. So when you get it in, I mean, it's up to you. I guess you could route your belt and then pull the pin, or pull the pin and use the 12 point to, just like you would just putting a belt on without replacing this. Either way, but just make sure you have the pin pulled out. Once your belt's on, everything's good to go. But yeah, that square should fit in down in there. There's our bolt, our new bolt that it came with, and then it's got Loctite on it already. This bolt torques to 41 foot-pounds. So we'll go ahead and put it in and get it torqued up, and then move on to the water pump. So I'm not a huge fan of this seal, because there's nothing really to grip it to hold it in place. I'll probably lube it up like I did the O-rings on the cooler with a little bit of grease, and hopefully the grease will hold it in place while we put it on, because definitely don't want that seal moving or dislodging, because that'll definitely cause a leak. But we'll get that on. The bolts will go on. You tighten them up in a crisscross pattern, and they'll torque to 71 inch-pounds. So we got our bolts. We'll go ahead and we'll lube this seal up a little bit, and then we'll put it on. Okay, with the water pump in and torqued, I had let the motor down, so I'm going to have to lift it back up so we can put the pulley and the bolts on. You got to clean them off, reapply some. I got some blue Loctite to reapply to them. And we'll torque those up to 15 foot-pounds. So going to have to probably hand tighten them, get the belt on, pull our pin on our tensioner, make sure everything's tight, and then that way it'll kind of hold the pulley from moving while we try and torque it. Alright, so we got our belt ran. I'll try and find a diagram how to run it. We still got the engine jacked up, and we'll go ahead and torque the pulley bolts to 15 foot-pounds. Alright, so the pulley was spinning a little bit. It was right out there. I just had James help and hold the pulley with a pair of pliers. So they torqued up. It's not that much torque, 15 foot-pounds, so we're good to go. We'll drop the motor back down and bolt the motor mount back up. Alright, we got the motor back down, the bolts in. We're going to tighten these up and torque them to 46 foot-pounds. Okay, so we got the car back together, got the airbox back in, torqued down the motor mount. Bled the cooling system, so filled it up, let it run, get all the air bubbles out. I'm gonna top that off to the line. Drove it around a little bit yesterday, and it seems to be good to go. So now I'm going to clean up underneath the mess of the coolant. When we pulled the water pump off, clean everything up, do one last pressure test, make sure the system's holding pressure and there's no other leaks, and then we should be good to go. Okay, so we got our coolant right in the center there, topped off. Cleaned everything up with the pressure washer underneath, and now we're going to pressure test it and just ensure it holds pressure. Okay, I put 15 psi in it. Let it sit for like 10-15 minutes and come back and make sure it's still holding. Alright, it's been on there for like 15-20 minutes and we are still holding 15 psi. So we are good. Like I said, we already drove it around yesterday, allowed the cooling system to bleed. I found a little procedure I can put in the description on bleeding the cooling system. Other than that, got our under panel back on, and hopefully this is the last time this car will need anything for a while. I'm a little sketched out on the lower radiator hose because it's got that plastic fitting. So if anything's going to leak next on this system, I would probably put money on that. But we'll see, one thing at a time, I guess. Again, if you have the money to do it, you might as well do it all. But alright, hopefully this video is helpful. I'll see you on the next one.